Chapter 23. A thin man brought Luke food and drink twice a day. He had eaten worse, eaten better, too. The routine was usually the same when breakfast or supper arrived. The thin man carried a tray to the door. The guard unlocked the door, leveled his blast rifle at Luke, and backed him to the cot. The thin man put the tray on the floor just inside the door, then left with the guard. This time Luke asked the thin man for the time. "Why do you care?" the thin man said. "Why do you care if I care?" Luke returned. The thin man sneered, but he told Luke what time it was and departed. This was the evening meal, as Luke had suspected. The reason for his question was simple. He was planning on leaving, and he wanted the cover of darkness. Once he got out of the building, better they were not able to spot him, that he could use the night for camouflage. Luke ate. The liquid was sweet, brown, and fizzy. The food was bland. Soy pro cutlets, some kind of orange vegetable, something green and crunchy, but there was no point escaping on an empty stomach. Once he got to his X-Wing and lifted, there was no telling how long it would be before he had a chance to eat again. Once he got to his X-Wing. He grinned around a mouthful of the green stuff. Like that was going to be the easy part. It would not be wise for them to be seen together, Curry told Leia. After you clear customs, meet me at these coordinates. Leia and Chewie agreed. There were a few tense moments at customs. The guard examined the holocard ID that said Leia was Bouche, tapped it against the table in front of him. Purpose of your visit? Business, Leia said in Ubese. Her voice clicked and buzzed through the mask. I see you're licensed to carry that weapon, but we do not take kindly to people who use them on Imperial Center. Leia said nothing. I think we'll have to take that helmet off, he said, just to be certain you match the holograph. He tapped the card again, looked at it. One can't be too careful. Leia said, It will damage my lungs to breathe the air without my filters. I can arrange an atmosphere room, he began. He stopped. Chewie moved close to Leia and the guard, rumbled something. She realized how used to him she'd gotten every time she took in his disguise. Good old Chewie. He was as dependable as sunlight, loyal to a fault. What's your problem? The guard said. Chewie babbled something that sounded angry. I don't care if you're late for an appointment, the guard said. But the line of people waiting to pass through customs was starting to lengthen, and the guard suddenly thrust Leia's ID card back at her. Move along, bounty hunter. I have others to process. Once Chewie was through, he and Leia moved quickly away from the area. Okay, now we go and see my contact. This section of the underground is relatively safe, she said, but still not a place where we want to relax our guard. Chewie nodded and patted his bowcaster. Said something. If you just ask me why we aren't going directly to see Guri, I want to see if I can't hedge our bets a little first. Aboard the Executor, Vader considered his upcoming meeting with Luke. Since last they'd met, the boy had had time to come to terms with what he'd been told. On some level, he must know the truth, that Vader was his father. Of course, that had been in another lifetime, when Vader had still been Anakin Skywalker, but the fact of it remained. He would turn him. He knew he could, because he had felt the dark side rise in Luke, had felt the power of his anger. The boy had loosed it once. He could be made to free it again. Each repetition became easier. The dark side was a path that grew wider and deeper each time you trod upon it. Soon it would be no effort at all for Luke to allow the dark side to rule. And the Emperor was right. Luke had much power in him. It was raw, unchanneled and untrained, but it was vast. His potential was larger than the Emperor's, larger than Vader's, but it was still only potential and not focused energy. When next they met, Vader would still be more adept, still the master. He would defeat the boy and bring him to the dark side. They would be in accord, father and son. And when that happened, nothing in the galaxy could stop them. None would dare oppose them. All would bow before them. Worlds would tremble at their approach. Under his mask, Vader smiled. Luke took several cleansing breaths, as he had been taught, and tried to release his thoughts at the same time. Ben, Obi-Wan, could plant suggestions in a stormtrooper's mind without apparent effort. It was not so easy for Luke. A couple of times he had managed it, but it required a lot of concentration to summon enough of the Force. You couldn't be worried about whether or not it was going to work, or what would happen if it failed halfway through. You pretty much couldn't have anything else on your mind. Well, at least Luke couldn't. And that made it tricky, given that if it didn't work, or if it quit before he was done, he might wind up dead. No, put those thoughts away. Remember that the Force is with you. You can do this. He took another breath, let half of it out, and allowed the Force to connect him to the mind of the guard in the hall. The sensation was strange, as always it was. It was not as if he were really in two places at once, but more as if there were a part of his own mind that was somehow not quite connected, not quite accessible. A kind of muzzy feeling. Luke became aware that the guard's feet hurt, that he needed to visit a refresher, that he was tired of standing here holding a blast rifle, watching a metal-blasted door, when there was no way that anybody could get through it. No way. Open the door. Huh? Who's there? You must open the door. I must open the door. You must put down your rifle and open the door now. I must put down my rifle. Open the door now. Luke watched the guard through the barred window, watched him put his rifle down. Got him. Luke grinned. A mistake. What? Lost him. Concentrate, Luke. Open the door. Luke put the thoughts of victory and loss out of his mind. The only thing that mattered was the guard. Open the door. Yes. Open the door. The guard's keycard slipped into the slot. The lock clicked. One of the sweetest sounds Luke had ever heard. He didn't dwell on it. You're very tired. You need to come in and lie on the cot and take a nice nap. Cot. Take a nap. The guard moved into the cell, walked past Luke. Luke took the keycard from the guard's hand. He glanced out into the corridor. Nobody else around. He stepped out of the cell, shut the door carefully, dropped the keycard on the floor, and picked up the blast rifle. He looked back. The guard snored on the cot. Now, this was more like it. He started down the corridor. He felt pretty confident. This guard had been easier than the one at the carnival where he had practiced walking on the tightrope. He ought to be able to take care of any others he ran into, either with the Force or the rifle. He also ought to head straight for the nearest exit and leave. With any luck, it would be hours before anybody even knew that he was gone. But he wanted to see if he could find his lightsaber first. He'd spent a lot of time building it, and since the escape had been so easy, he was pretty sure he could retrieve his Jedi weapon and leave just as easily. The Force was with him. He could do it. He was sure of it. As Leia and Chewie made their way down a dark and twisted passage into the heart of the Southern Underground, she shook her head. The casino complex on Rhodia made Mos Eisley look good, but it seemed that no matter how awful the place was, there was always another spot that was worse. The Southern Underground made the casino complex look like a vacation paradise. Beggars were everywhere, dressed in rags, gaunt and demanding. Whatever had driven them underground must be terrible if this was their only option. All manner of illicit offerings were made as she and Chewie moved farther into the maze of underground tunnels. Corridor dwellers would sell them whatever they wanted, and the particulars made Leia's stomach roil. Yes, there had always been such people, but the Empire had caused their numbers to rise tremendously. That which had been a small stain on the joy of the Republic was a blight on the bloated body of the Empire. Chewie growled at a partially clad woman, who smiled as she approached them. The woman hastily backed off. The corridor in which they walked was ill lit, splotched with graffiti in half a dozen common languages and pictographics, the walls themselves beaded with liquid as if they sweated. A planet whose surface was completely built over must have a big foundation. In places, the vast complex of tunnels and artificial caverns was a kilometer deep and continuing to go deeper. Here were locales where the sun's rays never came, where blue-gray mold sometimes grew 10 centimeters thick on walls and ceiling, where the dank and fecund air stank permanently of fungal rot, and worse. A black hooded and robed figure moved out from the darkness under a shattered glow stick, a green four-fingered hand extended for alms. Chewie said something and the figure moved away. A wave of the unwashed creature's body odor joined the other smells. Chewie wrinkled his nose. The stench was worse than the garbage compactor in which Han and Chewie and Luke had found themselves at first meeting. Fortunately for her, her bounty hunter's disguise filtered out the worst of the odors. Poor Chewie. She hoped where they were going had a good filtration system for its air, or ozone generators, or air fresheners at least. Ahead, a glow stick sputtered, painting the dim corridor with flashes of faltering light before it blinked out. Somewhere in the corridor behind them, somebody, or something, screamed. The cry dwindled into a liquidy gargle at its end. Leia kept her hand on her blaster. "How long until we leave hyperspace?" Vader asked. "A few hours, my lord," his captain said. "I will be in my chambers. Send someone to tell me when we arrive at the system." "Yes, my lord." "I will be there soon, my son." This was almost too easy, Luke thought as he picked his lightsaber up from the table. The little storage room was empty. No one seemed to be awake or about, and there was his comlink right there on the table. He would call R2, have him warn up of the X-Wing, and send Luke a homing signal. Once he got into his ship, these kloobs would never catch him again. Luke put the blaster rifle on the table and reached for his comlink. "Who's there? Move and I'll shoot." Uh-oh. Deep in the southern underground, the corridor opened up into a huge hemispherical chamber, as big as a city square, with a high roof, good lighting, and a circle of shops around the perimeter. Here the thick smells thinned. People and aliens moved about, protected by armed guards in some kind of uniforms who were obviously here to maintain some semblance of order. It could have been a small town shopping area almost anywhere on any civilized planet. Around part of the circle where they stood were a bakery, a weapon shop, a shoe store, a clothing kiosk, an electronics market. Here a restaurant, there a cantina, and there a plant store. Leia sighed, relieved. The place had changed since she'd been here, but their destination was still here. "There," she said to Chewie. The inside of the plant store smelled great. Would have been delightful anywhere, but more so given their surroundings. There were platters of gray stick moss, potted stretchy plants, flowers of all kinds, colored from red to violet, and thick billowy sheets of yellow fungus draped on the walls and ceiling. This latter produced oxygen without a need for sunlight, and was thus particularly suited for underground habitat. The amount of oxy in the air here was so great that it made Leia lightheaded to breathe it. The ceiling was 4 meters high, necessary because the original owner of the plant shop had been an old Hodin named Sparrow. Hodin were usually at least 3 meters tall themselves, counting their vermis-like hair, which looked like nothing so much as a nest of snakes covered with bright red and violet scales. Leia looked around and spotted the tall and spindly alien as he moved from behind a display of feather trees that brushed against the ceiling. Old Sparrow was still alive. Another stroke of good luck. "Good morning," Sparrow said. "How may I assist you?" Leia spoke. "We're here to collect a debt, Master Gardener." Since many Hodin were famous for their ecological work, especially that with plants, Master Gardener was considered a high honorific among them. Sparrow had earned his title by creating the strain of yellow fungus that hung on his walls and was used all over the galaxy. "I cannot recall that I owe anyone a debt," the old Hodin said. "Certainly not strangers." He looked amused. "Not even Leia Organa?" Now he did smile. "Ah, yes, the princess. I owe her my life and those of my entire family." "She would have you aid us." "And how do I know that you are from Princess Organa?" "How else would she know of your debt?" He nodded. "Reasonable. What would you have of me?" "We need to know about Black Sun. Who runs it? How we might contact them." Sparrow sighed. "I was about to make tea. Would you care for some?" "Another time, perhaps." "Well then, Black Sun is led by the Falleen, Shizor. He is known variously as the Dark Prince, or sometimes Underlord. He is also the owner and president of XTS, Shizor Transportation Systems, a more or less legitimate concern worth billions in itself. He seldom leaves Coruscant, has a palace that ranks with those of the Emperor and Darth Vader." Sparrow pointed up at the ceiling. "On the surface, though portions of it extend deep into the ground." Leia and Chewie looked at each other. This confirmed what Guri had told her. It was what she needed to know. Leia nodded and started to turn away. "Thank you, Master Gardener," she said. "You are welcome, Princess." Leia turned back to stare up at the old alien. "Excuse me." "Hodin are not limited to their eyes and ears, Princess." The thick, fleshy hair on his head stirred and waved, flashing bright under the shop's lights. "We never forget our friends." Leia bowed. "Then consider our debt balanced." The Hodin bowed in return. "Nonsense. My grandchildren's grandchildren could never live long enough to repay you. But I am happy to have been of some small service. Move with care, Princess. Black Sun is a formidable foe." "I will. Thank you again, Master Sparrow." Outside in the open area, Leia nodded at Chewie. "Well, it seems as if that much of Guri's story is true. Best we go and meet her." Chewie growled, and she wasn't sure if he was agreeing or disagreeing with her. That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.